How's it going? John here from Neural DSP, and welcome to this deep dive on Archetype Plini X. This is an update to our incredibly popular Archetype Plini. We have new devices as well as a redesigned user interface. So let's dive in. So I've just loaded up the plugin and I'm on the default preset. What we're going to do is go from top to bottom, starting at the pre-effects. First, we have the compressor pedal. It's a really simple compressor pedal with only two controls. We have comp for compression and level. Currently, with all of the post effects bypassed, my guitar sounds like this. I'm now going to engage the compressor. And that's instantly given it a bit more life and made it slightly fuller sounding. So with the compression dial, I'm just going to dial that in a bit more. And now I'll dial it back. And now put it all the way up. You'll hear then that this compression dial can really even out the dynamics in your playing, especially when playing quietly. And then we have the level control on the compressor. I've set the comp to noon, and this level control can essentially be used to drive the amp harder or give the amp less input. So a really nice flexible output level of this compressor pedal. With it at noon, sounds like this. Increasing this level can drive the amp even further. Or I could dial it back and have more of a cleaner edge of breakup sound. Next, we move on to the octave pedal, and this can allow you to have an octave both above and below your dry signal with independent level controls for each of those three signals. My guitar currently, with the pedal bypassed, sounds like this. Putting in the octave with everything at noon, sounds like this. Now I'm going to take out the octave below and leave in the octave above and my direct guitar. Now I'll do the opposite. I'll take out the above octave and bring in the octave below. You can also take out your direct signal and just have the wet octaves above and below. And as these are all set at noon, you can boost these to make the octaves a bit more obvious and vivid, or you can make them a lot more subtle. So what I'm just going to do is dial in a classic octave below patch with a bit more of the octave below. I've also just given the amp a bit more gain to give it that classic rhythm octave sound. Okay, so now we're about to move on. I'm just going to bypass it with the bypass switch. So now we move on to the drive pedal. As part of Plini X, we now have the option to have this drive acting as either a fuzz pedal or an overdrive pedal. When looking at the pedal, you'll see that we have this switch here in the middle, toggling between overdrive and fuzz. On top of that, we have the typical controls that you'd find on an overdrive pedal, such as drive, level, and tone. With this drive pedal bypassed, it sounds like this. And now in overdrive mode and everything else at noon, here's how the drive pedal sounds. Now I'm going to bring the drive down so you can hear how it sounds with more of a subtle overdrive effect. Or I could push the drive almost all the way up. Now the drive's back at noon, I'm going to play around with the tone control. So with it dialed back, you're going to get more of a darker overdriven sound. Or you could push the tone and get a brighter, more articulate sound. And you've also got a level control, so you can use this as an overall output from the pedal, but also use it to either drive the amp harder or less. So let's just bring it back. Now let's raise the level, drive the amp harder. Now I'm going to engage fuzz mode, and with everything at noon, sounds like this. Let's bring the drive back. So still a really articulate fuzz when you bring it back. And now pushing the drive. Now the drive's back at noon, let's play around with tone. So dialing it back again, you're going to get that warmer, softer, chewier fuzz. Or we could push it almost all the way up with the tone dial. And then similarly, with the level control, you can either dial this back or dial it in quite a lot and push the amp even harder. So I'm just going to play a chord and get the full sweep of that so you can hear how it sounds. So now let's dial in a classic overdrive pedal tone. The tone without the drive pedal engaged sounds like this. Now engaging the pedal, I'm going to bring the drive back, raise the tone as well as the level, and push the amp a bit harder. Now let's dial in a fuzz sound. So I'm going to switch the toggle selection from overdrive to fuzz. I'm going to push the drive a bit as well as the level control and really push that amp. And I'm also going to bring back the tone because I'm going to go for a more rounded off, warmer fuzz sound. So to demonstrate this, I've just given the amp a little bit more gain, and here's how it sounds without the pedal engaged. And now with the drive pedal engaged. So I'm just going to bypass it here with the bypass switch, and now let's move on to the delay. Now we're on to the delay pedal in the pre-effects. I'm going to engage it with the bypass stomp switch, And you'll see here we have 4 dials and 1 toggle switch. We have a mix, time, feedback, and tone. Mix is going to be a blend between your dry signal and your wet delay signal. Time is going to refer to the amount of time in between the delay repeats. Feedback is going to be the amount of repeats your delay has. And then tone will be a high frequency control switch. So with it to the left, it'll be a lot darker, and with it to the right, it'll let all those high frequencies through and you'll have a brighter delay sound. And then with this toggle switch, you can see it toggles between note and milliseconds. So if you want to set it to a specific millisecond value, the time dial will change that in milliseconds. Or if you wanted to change it to a specific note value, change the toggle switch to note, and then the time dial changes the note value. One thing to note about this delay pedal in the pre-effects is that it's going into the front end of an amplifier, and this creates a vastly different sound to a delay after the amplifier. With the delay pedal bypassed, here's how my guitar sounds. And here's the delay pedal engaged. So you'll be able to hear that with a delay in the pre-effects, all those different delay signals hitting the front end of an amp give a very jarring and dissonant sound, especially when you've driven the amp slightly and you've got a bit of distortion. And this can be a really creative tool and effect to use in your playing. So now let's really dive in and push the mix. I'm also going to keep the time just where it is because I think that's fine for now. Feedback, I'm also going to have a longer feedback so you can hear this effect exaggerated. And then I'm also going to push the tone, make it really bright for now so you can hear all that high-end information. Now let's go for a more subtle use with this pre-delay. Let's bring the mix back. We'll actually raise the time as well. The feedback, let's bring that back as well, and also the tone. So this delay pedal in the pre-effects is a non-typical way of routing a delay pedal in a normal guitar setup. However, many players, such as Plini himself, have used this effect to achieve really interesting results. So let's hear all these devices in a musical context. I've written a track to showcase the various aspects of this plugin, and I've used the pre-effects in several places. I used the compressor and octave pedal in a heavy rhythm patch using a split chord position on my guitar, and it sounds like this. And in this preset, which I've called Split Octave, I've dialed in the compressor to just have everything at noon and give the tone that bigger body, just keep everything consistent. Next to that, the octaver is dialed in with an octave below. I've got that all the way up, and I've taken off the octave above my drive signal. Then the direct level, I've also pushed a bit as well. I've used the drive and delay in a tremolo lead preset, and it sounds like this. So let's have a look at how I dialed this tone in. In terms of the drive pedal, the drive is at noon just to give it a bit more saturation. We're in fuzz mode, and the level is also around noon, just driving the amp a bit more. The tone is all the way up because I wanted all of that pick attack and all of that clarity to get a bit messy when fed into the delay in the pre-effects. With this delay pedal, the mix is just above noon because I want it to be really vivid and obvious. The time is at 400 milliseconds. With the feedback control, I've brought this down slightly to just around 9 o'clock. And that means that there's enough repeats there for the effect to be present, but so that you don't lose the effect of a melody with too many repeats going on. Next to that, the tone is at noon because I dialed in a lot of tone on the drive pedal and it didn't really need any more high end. And you can hear there how this delay in the pre-effects can really lead to some sonically interesting results. This pre-effects section then can offer a very broad range of sonic possibilities in terms of dialing in a sound. And it also gives you immediate access to some of the sounds that makes Plini's tone so unique. Now let's have a look at the amplifier section. In Archetype Plini X, we have 3 amplifiers. We have a clean, crunch, and distorted high gain amplifier. First, let's start at amplifier 1. At the bottom, you'll see we have 3 symbols, and I've selected the first one, and we're here on the clean amplifier. With the current settings on the default preset, it sounds like this. You'll hear that this is an amp with tons of headroom, really chimey highs, but also a full-bodied low end as well. First, let's start at the gain dial on amplifier number 1. This can be used to either clean up and have even more headroom, or to drive the amp a bit harder into edge of breakup tones. So I'll dial the gain back so you can hear that, and then just boost the output to compensate for the loss in level. Now I'm going to push it almost all the way. I've brought the output back to noon, and now that the gain's pushed a bit, you'll hear that this gets into an edge of breakup pushed clean type territory. Now I've just put the gain back to noon, and we have a bright switch. So this can be used just to add an extra top end presence to your clean guitar sound. Here's how it sounds without the bright switch engaged. And now with the bright switch in. Next we have the bass control. This can be used to really tighten up the low end and get rid of any muddiness if you wish, or to make it sound even fuller. So first, let's bring it back. And now let's really boost it. Now onto the mid control. Let's pull that back and scoop the mids. And now let's really push the mids. Moving on to the treble dial, let's hear how this can darken up the tone if we bring it back. Or if you push it, get nice and bright and articulate. And next to that, we then have the blend dial. This allows you to blend in a compressed version of your dry guitar DI. And it's worth noting that this compressed DI bypasses everything in the plugin apart from the post effects. This means that if you engage any of the pre-effects, such as the distortion or octave pedal, they won't affect this compressed DI signal. So this is how my guitar tone sounds with the blend all the way down, and it'll just be the clean amplifier. Now let's bring in the blend to halfway. And now all the way up. Next to this, we then have the master dial. This is going to be affecting the output of the power stage. So when you drive this hard, you'll get that driven power stage sound. For now, I'm just going to bring the master down and also bring the output up to compensate for that volume loss. And now bring it up as well as reducing the output. Next, we're on to the presence dial. This can be used to dial in a bit more high end and get that high end sheen and clarity that's really like a high shelf control. So let's first hear it, dialed back a bit. And now pushed almost all the way up. Finally, we're then on to the output dial, and this is an overall volume control for this amplifier. So what I'm going to do is play a chord and sweep it from low to high so you can hear the range of this control. And then at the far right of the amplifier, we also have a bypass switch if you wanted to bypass the amplifier. So let's hear this first amp in a musical context. In the track at the introduction of this video, I used this amplifier number 1 as a clean tone for the introduction chords. So here's a preset called Clean Chords with this amplifier and all of the effects engaged. So that was amplifier number 1, a great clean amplifier with tons of headroom, as well as a complementary pedal platform for the pre-effects. Now we're on to amplifier number 2. This has a bit more gain on tap and is really good for more pushed, distorted sounds, so let's dive in. With all of the controls set to noon, it sounds like this. So first we have the gain dial. This can go anywhere from clean to push clean, overdrive, mid-gain crunch tones. So with it dialed back, here's how it sounds. And now if I push it almost all the way up, you'll hear then this amp can cover a lot of ground in terms of its tonal possibilities. So I've put the gain back to noon, and next we have the bright switch, which can be used to just add a bit of top end presence and clarity to this amplifier sound. With it bypassed, it sounds like this. And engaged. Now we're on to the bass dial. Let's bring this back and clean up the low end. And now bring it in. Let's do the same thing with the mid control. So scoop the mids first. And now let's really push the mids. With the treble control, you can dial that back and make your sound a bit softer in the top end. Or you can push it and add further definition and clarity to the top end. Now we're on to the master dial, and similar to amp 1, this is the power amp's gain control. So first, let's bring this back and hear how it affects the sound, and also bringing in the output to compensate. And now let's push it a bit, and I'm also going to bring down the output. And after the master dial, we have presence. This is just again going to be a top end control, so you can really dial in that top end sheen if you want. First, let's bring it back and soften or roll off the top end. now let's bring it in and emphasize this top end. Finally, we're then onto the output dial, and this is an overall output level for this amplifier. Again, I'll play a chord so you can hear the full scope of this control. And then finally, at the far right of amplifier 2, we again have a bypass button if you wish to bypass the amplifier. In the track, I used amplifier 2 for a crunch lead tone in the middle section because I wanted some sustain and articulation to the notes without it being too saturated or too clean. So amplifier 2 was perfect for this. Here's how it sounds with all of the effects added as well. Now we're on to amplifier 3. This is the lead amplifier, and it's great if you want saturated, high gain distorted tones, and it's perfect for singing sustained leads as well. With everything at noon, here's how this amplifier sounds. The first control on this amplifier is the gain control. Let's first bring it back and hear it cleaned up a bit. Now let's hear it with the gain pushed almost all the way up. Next we have a bright switch, and this can be used just to add in a little more top end to your distorted sound. With the bright switch disengaged, here's how it sounds. And now bringing it in. Now we're onto the bass control, so let's bring this back and clean up the low end a bit. Or we could push this and add even more low end in. Onto the mid control. Let's scoop these mids first. Or we could push them and get more of a vocal mid-range. Now onto the treble control. Let's roll this back and get a softer rolled off top end. Now let's push it and get a brighter, more articulate top end. Next we're on to the master control, and this is an output control for the power stage of amplifier number 3. So let's dial it back and boost the output, and here's how it sounds. Now let's boost the master and bring back the output. Next, we're on to the presence dial. This can be used to dial in some of that upper top end or to take it away and get a softer, distorted sound. First, let's do that. Let's bring it back a bit. And now let's boost it. And then we have the overall output dial. Again, I'll play a chord and you can hear the full scope of that control. And finally, you have a bypass button at the far right of the amplifier if you wanted to bypass amplifier 3 as well. In the track, I used amplifier 3 for a heavy, saturated rhythm sound with tons of sustain and a nice amount of tightness as well. So again, I've pulled this preset up called Heavy Rhythm, and here's how it sounds with all of the effects engaged. And that covers it for the amplifier section. As you can hear, we can cover everything from crystal clean tones all the way to highly saturated, distorted sounds. Plini's music is extremely diverse, and with these 3 amplifiers, you'll have access to that full range of tones. Now we move on to the cab section. Let's just go over the layout of this page first. So it's split into 2 halves with 2 mic placement options. On the left, we have a drop-down menu with 2 arrows above it, and this is where you'll select the microphone model for this first half. You can either cycle through with the arrows, or by selecting the drop-down menu, scroll through the different mic options as well as load a custom IR if you want. Next to this, you can also bypass this mic if you wish. Below that, we have parameters for position, distance, mic level, and panning, all for this one mic. As well as that, below we have a phase switch if you want to flip the phase. And this is mirrored on the right-hand side as well with an identical set of controls. But for now, I'm just going to bypass this side so we can hear how these parameters affect just one mic. Currently, I'm using the Dynamic 57 mic and it sounds like this. Let's maybe select a Dynamic 421. Ribbon 160. Ribbon 121. As you can see, there are plenty of different mic options to choose from, and they each have a different character. So, moving on, we then have the position parameter. If I move this, you'll see the mic on the speaker change position. This is a very hands-on feature, and you can even drag the mic itself. So, let's start with it all the way at 0, right over the center of the cone. So that's going to be a brighter sound. If we move it towards the outside of the cone, all the way out, you're going to get a lot darker with a lot more low end. Next, let's have a look at the distance parameter. So similarly, as you move this control, the mic moves accordingly. So let's start with it right up at 0. Let's gradually move it away. And then all the way out. So you'll hear that as you move the microphone away, the character's changing, we're losing a lot of that low end and body. Let's move that back to 0 and keep the position where it is. Below that, we've then got a mic level, and you can use this to alter the blend of the two microphones when we've got two engaged, or you can just use it as a level control. So if I just play a chord, you'll hear the scope of this control. Additionally, you can also pan the mic in the stereo field. So I'll do the same thing again, and you'll hear it go from left to right in stereo. Now I'm going to engage this second impulse response on the far right. And to dial this in, I'm now going to bypass the one on the left. I'm going to change this to a dynamic 57, and here's how it sounds. With the position of this, I'm going to have this nice and bright over the center of the cone. And the distance, I'll push back a bit. And the panning of this, I'm going to pan all the way to the right. Now what I'm going to do is bring in this ribbon 121, have the position slightly darker. The distance I'll keep up close, and the panning I'll pan all the way to the left. And now what we'll have is a stereo mic setup with this first microphone, the ribbon 121, in your left, and the dynamic 57 with these parameters in the right. When in this cab section, you can also change out the amplifier heads by selecting the logos at the bottom of the screen, as well as changing the parameters and dials on the amps in real time. In the track, I used this dual miking setup in one of the presets for the clean melody lead. In this preset, as the first microphone, I had a dynamic 57 with the relevant positions, kept them fairly standard. But then on the second microphone, I had the ribbon 121 with these positions. And this gave a nice blend with the 57 being a bit brighter and the ribbon 121 being a bit darker. So I had a full range set of frequencies for this clean tone. Here's how the preset sounds with all the effects added in as well. The cab section in Archetype Plini X allows you to process this single cabinet with studio level detail. Now we're here at the EQ section. In Archetype Plini X, we have a 9-band graphic EQ. And on this EQ, you have 9 different sliders with each of them corresponding to a specific frequency band. And you can raise or lower these sliders, and as you'll see on the display above a slider, it will correspond to a cut or boost at that dB. Currently, I'm on the default preset, and it sounds like this. Maybe I wanted to clean up the low end. What I could do is start by pulling off 65, 125, and 250, and what this will do is roll off all those low frequencies. I could do the same thing in the top end if that was a bit too shrill or harsh. So pull 16K down and follow it up with a slope on 8 and 4K. Alternatively, maybe I want to have a mid scoop and keep the lows and highs where they were. I can just double tap each of these sliders and they'll go back to 0 dB. Let's start by pulling 1K out, 500, and also 2 kilohertz. Here's how it sounds. Another use of this EQ could be to either cut or boost specific frequency bands that you want to either remove or enhance. Maybe I want to remove some of the lower mids to avoid muddiness in some of the more complex chord voicings. So, here is it before I make a move on the EQ. If I pull out 250 and 500, that's going to just carve out some of those lower mids. And I can A/B this change by selecting the bypass button at the far right of the EQ. In my track, I use the EQ in Archetype Plini X in a more subtle, corrective way. For the heavy rhythm patch, I was using the EQ to duck out 2 and 4 kHz. This is due to the fact that when you use higher gain sounds, it's more likely that there'll be whistly frequencies around the high mids that can get a bit distracting and in the way. So I use this EQ to just duck those out and make the sound a bit more focused and tight. Here's how it sounds before the EQ is engaged. And now with the EQ engaged. This EQ section can be a really handy tool in either making drastic changes to your tone or more subtle movements to enhance the overall sound of your guitar tone. Now we're in the post effects section. In the post effects, we have 3 different devices. We have a chorus pedal, a delay pedal, and a reverb pedal. Starting at the chorus pedal, we have 4 different parameters. Starting off, we have a rate dial. This is going to determine the frequency at which the modulation of the chorus happens. On the left, you'll have a slower rate, and at the right, a faster rate. So I'm just going to turn this chorus pedal on via the bypass switch to demonstrate this. Currently, the rate is around 9 o'clock and it sounds like this. Let's now put it at noon, a slightly faster rate. And now all the way up for a really exaggerated chorus effect. Moving along, we then have a vintage and spatial mode. These are going to be 2 different chorus characters, and I'll get to this last after I've gone over the other parameters. So next to that, we then have depth, and this is going to determine the depth of which the pitch modulates for your chorus signal. With the depth towards the left, it will be a subtle, less intrusive chorus. So with depth dialed in to the left, it sounds like this. Now let's put it at noon, and it'll become a bit more exaggerated. And now all the way up. Below the depth control, we have a mix dial, and this is going to be a blend control between your dry and wet chorused guitar signal. So with the mix all the way to the left, you're just going to hear the dry guitar signal and no chorus effect. With the mix dial at noon, you'll get more of a 50-50 type blend. And with mix all the way up, you're going to get the most audible chorus effect. As I mentioned earlier, this chorus pedal has 2 modes, a vintage and a spatial mode. Everything we've been hearing so far is in vintage mode, so let's use this toggle switch and flip over to spatial mode and hear how these parameters sound. With the parameters set in their current states, here's how spatial mode sounds. Let's now exaggerate the rate and the depth. Let's also bring up the mix, increase the depth and the rate, and get a really vivid chorus effect. And now, just for the sake of comparison, here's the exact same settings in vintage mode. As you can hear, vintage mode is a lot more exaggerated than the spatial mode, but these two characters offer a lot of flexibility for any type of chorus sound that you want to dial in. In my track, I utilised all three of these post-effects devices for the intro, wet, crunch lead part. I dialed in the chorus in vintage mode with the rate and depth just shy of noon, around 11-ish, as well as the mix at 50%. So it gave it that chorus character without it being too overbearing. Here's how the part sounds without the chorus. And here it is with the chorus engaged. So that was the chorus pedal in the post effects. Next, let's have a look at the delay pedal. Starting at the top left of the delay pedal, we have a mix control. This is going to determine the dry and wet blend of your dry guitar signal and the delayed repeats. With the mix at 50%, it sounds like this. I could choose to have a subtler delay effect by bringing the mix down. And when bringing the mix control above 50%, you'll hear more of the delay repeats than your guitar signal. Next, at the top of the delay pedal, we have three toggle switches. The first one of which toggles between milliseconds and note values. In milliseconds mode, you can set the time interval in milliseconds between each delay repeat. And below the digital display, you'll see a time dial where you can dial that in. Alternatively, you can click and type a value. When in note mode, it's going to show a note division. And this can be determined by using the time dial to set that particular note division for the delay repeats. And this will correspond to the BPM set within the pedal, as you can see on the display. Currently, I'm in milliseconds mode and it's set to 250 milliseconds. And it sounds like this. Using the time dial, we can raise this millisecond value and have a bigger interval between the delay repeats. Now I'm just going to flip it into note mode and you'll see that it's snapped to a quarter note at 120 beats per minute, which sounds like this. However, I could change this to a dotted eighth note. Next to the milliseconds and note toggle switch, we have a ping pong toggle switch. When this is selected or engaged, it means that your delay repeats will go left and right in the stereo field, creating that ping pong effect. Here's how it sounds with ping pong bypassed. And here's with ping pong engaged. Next we have a sync toggle switch. When this is bypassed, the tempo in the delay pedal is set by using the tap tempo. When engaged, it means that the BPM in the delay pedal is going to sync to either the DAW or program that you're using. This means that when you're working within a project, say in a DAW, you can set this to sync and all of the note values will correspond to the BPM of your track. Next to this, we then have a feedback dial at the far right at the top, and this will determine the length of time that your delay repeats go on for. So, with feedback towards the left, we're going to have a shorter amount of repeats. Bringing this to noon, we'll get a few more repeats. And then with feedback all the way up, you're going to get an almost infinite number of delay repeats. Moving down a row of dials, at the far left we have a tone control. This is a high frequency control that can determine either the brightness or darkness of the delay repeats. With tone to the left, we're going to have a darker, rounded off sound to the repeats. Now the tones at noon, they're going to be a bit brighter. And with tone all the way up, they're going to be nice and bright. Next to this tone dial, we have the time dial. And as we've said, this will determine either the millisecond value or note value for your delay repeats. Next to the time dial, we have a tape saturation dial. Dialing this in towards the right will add increasing amounts of tape saturation to your delay repeats, giving them a distorted, crunchy character. To demonstrate this, I'm just going to raise the mix and emphasize these delay repeats, and we'll start off with tape saturation all the way to the left, so they're going to be nice and clean, and then we'll dial this in. Let's bring it in halfway. And then all the way up. Next to this tape saturation dial, we have a tape mod dial, and this will apply tape modulation to your delay repeats. So with it dialed into the left, we'll have less pitch modulation on our delay repeats, more of a subtle effect, and it sounds like this. Let's put it at noon. And with tape mod all the way up, we'll have this enhanced pitch modulation effect. Then at the bottom left of the pedal, we have the bypass foot switch, which you can select to bypass or engage the pedal, and we have a corresponding light on this pedal as well to show whether it's engaged or not. And then at the far right of the pedal, we have the tap tempo button, which is only available when not in sync mode. And you can select that at any given tempo, and your BPM will show up on the digital display. Now I'm going to add this delay pedal into the wet crunch lead preset from the track. And here's how it sounds. So that's the delay pedal. Now let's move on to the reverb pedal. For the reverb pedal, we have a few parameters to go over. At the top left, we have a mix dial, and this is going to be a blend between your dry guitar signal and the wet reverb. Currently in the default preset, with the reverb parameters set as they are, here's how it sounds. Dialing back this mix will give a more subtle reverb effect. However, dialing this in almost all the way will exaggerate this reverb and make it very upfront. Next to the mix dial, we have the space dial, and this is going to determine the stereo width of your reverb. With it all the way to the left, it sounds like this. With the space halfway, here's how it sounds. And then with space all the way in, here's how that sounds. Next to the space control, we have the decay dial. This will determine the length of the reverb tail. With this dialed in towards the left, you're going to have a shorter, quicker reverb tail. Let's put it halfway. And with the decay dialed in at higher values, you're going to get long, drawn out, luscious sustain from your reverb. Moving on, at the bottom left of the reverb pedal, we have a high pass control. This can determine how much of the low end is rolled off. With it towards the left, you'll have a low end rich tone, and by increasing this, you're going to gradually roll more of that low end off and it'll become brighter. So, with this high pass all the way to the left, here's how it sounds. Let's set it to halfway. And now let's high pass it all the way. And you can hear there that's rolling off the low end quite nicely. On the far right of the plugin, we have a low pass control. And in a similar fashion, when this is turned all the way to the right, it means that none of the high frequencies are getting rolled off. However, as you roll it towards the left, it means that you're going to get a darker sound because those higher frequencies are getting EQ'd out. So, with this all the way to the right, you're going to have a nice, bright, airy reverb. Let's set this to noon, so slightly darker. And now let's low pass it all the way. And as is the case with all of these post effects, you have a bypass switch if you want to bypass it or engage it. So now here is that wet crunch lead preset, this time with the reverb engaged as well. That wraps up the post effects section, and this is an area where you can really add some dimension to your sound. These devices are a huge part of Plini's sound, and they're amazing tools to get creative with and start sculpting your own tone as well. Now let's have a look at some of the global features of the plugin. As part of Archetype Plini X, we've updated the UI, making it more intuitive and improving usability. Starting at the top left of the plugin page, we have the input dial. This can be used to set the level at which your instrument hits the plugin. If you have an instrument with a higher output, you may need to duck this to avoid clipping on the input, or vice versa. If your instrument has a lower output, you may need to increase this so that your signal is healthy going into the front end of the plugin. Next to this, we then have the gate. This can be engaged or bypassed using the toggle switch next to the word gate, and you'll see that by default it's set to -80 decibels. This noise gate can be active anywhere from -96 dB all the way up to 0 dB, and this allows you to control any unwanted noise that may be present in your signal. Next to this, we then have the transpose feature, and this allows you to either raise or lower the pitch of your guitar by 12 semitones, otherwise known as an octave. Currently, my guitar is in standard tuning, and it sounds like this. Now, if I set the transpose to -1 semitone, here's how it sounds. I could take this even lower. Let's go -5 semitones. Next to this, we then have the input mode. Currently, we're using a mono input. We've selected that in the audio settings because a guitar is just a mono instrument. However, if you were running a stereo input, say with a keyboard with a left and right output, you could use this plugin in stereo just by switching that toggle into stereo mode. This means that you can have your stereo input still acting in stereo using that stereo field, plus the added benefit of using this plugin and all of its devices in stereo. Next to this is the preset manager. And at the top of this, you'll see two arrows, one left, one right. And by selecting these arrows, you can scroll through presets that you've created yourself or that are part of the plugin. As well as that, you can select this drop-down menu where your current preset is shown and go through all of the artist and factory presets, as well as your user saved presets in this directory. If you've made a few changes to your current preset, an asterisk will show next to the preset name, and you can then select Save As and type in a new preset name. Next to Save As, you then have 3 dots, and the Reset button, when selected, allows you to reset the current preset to its saved settings. And then Import allows you to import a preset from your computer's file directory. And then to go back, all you do is select the X and you're back at the original preset manager. Next to the preset manager, we have the doubler. This can be engaged by selecting the toggle switch, and you'll see that its default state is 6 milliseconds. This will give a 6 millisecond spread and make your guitar seem wider in the stereo field as if it's been doubled. To demonstrate this effect, I'm going to play with the effect bypassed and then pop it in. And here's the doubler now engaged. You can exaggerate this doubled effect by increasing the milliseconds value, all the way up to 20 milliseconds if you wish. Next, we have the master output control of the plugin. This can be used to either attenuate or increase the output of the plugin to make sure that your signal is at a healthier level and that you're not clipping. And that wraps up this top bar of global features for the plugin. At the bottom left of the plugin window, we have the tuner. Selecting that brings up the tuner screen. At the top right of the tuner window, you can see an icon that allows you to either mute or unmute the tuner. At the bottom left of the tuner window, you can select either sense or hertz to be shown when tuning. And finally, at the bottom right of the tuner window, you can select the frequency in hertz that you want to tune to. Next to the tuner, we have the MIDI mappings window. This allows you to see all of the program MIDI information assigned to the plugin. And on top of that, you can also add new MIDI mappings if you wish. Next to that, we then have the tap button where you can tap in a BPM globally for the plugin. Alternatively, you can click the BPM value and type in a value. Next to this, we have the metronome. When selecting that, it brings up the metronome screen. At the top left, we have a volume for the metronome, the time signature that the metronome will beat in, and also a drop-down menu where you can select the sound of the metronome and an option to mute it as well. We then have the option to pan the metronome anywhere from hard left to hard right. Below that, we can then see the BPM that the metronome will beat at, and similar to the tap tempo of the plugin, we can click here and input our desired metronome value. Alternatively, we can always tap it in. Next to this, we then have a drop-down menu with a few rhythmic subdivisions for the metronome as well, and then a big play button to engage the metronome. At the bottom of the metronome window, we have visual icons for each of the beats of the metronome, and these can all be customized in different ways to have different patterns. And when closing the metronome window, there is also a play button at the bottom of the plugin window. Next to that, we then have the audio settings. Here, you can select your audio device type and also configure your audio inputs and outputs. At the bottom of the audio settings menu, you can then also further select your sample rate and your audio buffer size, as well as the option to select your MIDI input devices for use as well. At the bottom right of the plugin window, you'll see two arrows where you can select the window size of the plugin. And that rounds up an overview of the global features for Archetype Plini X. Right, let's have a look at some of the presets that come with Archetype Plini X. The first one we're going to have a look at is called Camino. Let's take a look at this next preset called Cumulo Nimrod. This preset is called Old Fashioned. This preset is called Soda Boy. This preset is by Simon Grove and it's called Plini Crunch Rhythm. This next preset is by Simon Grove and it's called Plini Crystal Clean. This next preset is by Simon Grove and it's called Plini High Gain Lead. So that pretty much covers it for this deep dive on Archetype Plini X. This plugin is a versatile and inspiring suite of devices that will unlock that signature Plini sound. You can play this plugin today with a free trial by heading on over to neuraldsp.com. All that's left to say is I've been John Connor, thanks for watching.